The rain didn't fall in Black Ridge. It attacked. It came down in gray, freezing sheets that turned the Montana dust into a graveyard of thick, grasping mud. Silas Thorne stood on his porch, watching the sky turn the color of a fresh bruise. He had a ranch that grew more rocks than cattle, a dog that had died 3 winters ago, and a silence that lived in his house like a permanent tenant. He didn't expect visitors. No one came to the end of the trail unless they were lost or looking for a place to die. Then he saw her. She wasn't walking so much as she was being pushed by the wind, a ghost in a tattered blue dress, her hair a tangled crown of wet straw. She collapsed 20 yards from the porch, face first into the sludge. Silas didn't move at first. The West teaches you that a body in the dirt is often a trap. But then he saw her hand move, a weak, clawing motion toward the light of his window. He swore under his breath, grabbed his slicker, and stepped into the deluge. When he reached her, the smell hit him. Not just of mud, but the metallic tang of old blood and the sickly sweet scent of cheap perfume masked by sweat. She was small, too small for a world this loud. He rolled her over, and her eyes snapped open. They were a startling, haunted green, wide with a terror so deep it looked like madness. "Please," she whispered. The word broke against the sound of the thunder. He didn't answer. Silas Thorne wasn't a man of words. He scooped her up. She weighed nothing, barely more than a bundle of dry kindling. He carried her inside, the mud from her dress staining his floor, and laid her on the rug before the hearth. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask who had beaten her face. An hour passed. The only sound was the hiss of the rain and the rhythmic pop of the cedar logs. Finally, she stirred. She pushed herself up, her breath hitching in her chest. She looked at the cabin, the peeling wallpaper, the stacks of old newspapers, the single plate on the table. "You're alone," she said. Her voice was a rasp, like sandpaper on glass. Silas nodded. 12 years, mostly by choice. "They'll come for me," she said, her eyes darting to the door. He doesn't like losing things he paid for. Silas stood up and walked to the window. He looked out into the blackness. He didn't see hoofprints yet, but he knew the rhythm of the world. Men who buy women don't stop until they've collected their interest. "Drink your coffee," Silas said. "The door is barred. The glass is thick. And I've got enough lead in this house to sink a riverboat." The next 3 days were a slow crawl of healing and unspoken questions. Her name was Clara. She didn't offer a last name, and Silas didn't want one. A last name made a person real, and real people were harder to bury if things went south. She spent her time by the fire, wrapped in one of Silas's old wool blankets. She watched him work. She watched him oil his saddle, sharpen his skinning knife, and mend the holes in his socks with steady, callous fingers. "Why aren't you afraid?" she asked on the second night. Silas looked at his hands. "Fear is for men who have something left to lose, Clara. I buried my somethings a long time ago in a valley near the border. Now, I'm just a man waiting for the sun to go down." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a second, the terror in her eyes flickered out, replaced by a weary kind of respect. But that night, the nightmares came. Silas was sitting at the kitchen table, cleaning the grit out of his Colt .45, when he heard the scream. It wasn't loud. It was a strangled, pathetic sound that came from the back bedroom. He went to the door and saw her thrashing under blankets, her skin slick with a cold sweat. He approached the bed slowly. "Clara, wake up. You're in the house. You're safe." She bolted upright, her breath coming in jagged gasps. She looked at him, but she didn't see Silas. She saw a monster. She began to tremble, not just a shiver, but a violent, bone-deep shaking that made the bed frame rattle. "I can't stop," she sobbed. "I can't stop shaking. Please, just hold me, just for a minute. I need to know I'm not a ghost." Silas froze. He hadn't touched a woman's hand in a decade, let alone held one in the dark. He felt a sudden, sharp ache in his chest, a memory of a wife and a life that had been burned to ash. He sat on the edge of the bed. He reached out and took her hands in his. Her skin was ice. He squeezed her fingers, trying to ground her, trying to pull her back from whatever hell she was reliving. "I've got you," he grunted. The floor is solid. As her shaking began to subside, Silas felt something hard and cold press against his palm. He shifted his grip, his thumb brushing over her ring finger. He expected a wedding band, or perhaps a cheap trinket from a parlor house. But it wasn't. He pulled her hand into the sliver of moonlight filtering through the shutters. On her right hand sat a heavy, tarnished silver ring. It featured a large, blackened stone set in an ornate, Victorian filigree. But it was the hinge on the side that caught his eye. Silas's blood ran cold. He had seen a ring like this once before, on the finger of a Pinkerton agent who had died in a chair across from him. It was a poison ring, a suicide band. He flipped the hinge with his thumbnail. The stone tipped back, revealing a small, hollow reservoir filled with a fine, grayish powder. He looked at Clara. Her eyes were wide, watching him. The shaking had stopped, replaced by a terrifying, hollow stillness. "Who gave this to you, Clara?" Silas asked, his voice dropping an octave. She didn't answer. "This isn't a trinket," Silas continued, his grip tightening just enough to let her know he wasn't playing. "This is for someone who expects to be captured, or someone who was sent to make sure someone else doesn't wake up. Which one is it?" Clara pulled her hand away, tucking it under the blanket. "It was my mother's," she lied. Silas stood up. The warmth was gone. The sanctuary was tainted. "Your mother didn't carry enough arsenic to kill a stable of horses in her jewelry, girl. I've spent my life looking at liars. You're good, but you're not that good." He walked to the door, his spurs clinking softly on the floorboards. "If you're still here listening to this story," Silas said, or rather, the voice narrating the tale shifted, breaking the tension. "You're probably wondering the same thing Silas was. Is this girl a victim, or is she the blade? Before we find out what was in that ring, and whose name was written on the bullet coming for this cabin, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep these fires burning out here in the cold. And while you're at it, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Is it raining where you are, or is the sun high?" Silas went back to the kitchen and sat. He didn't sleep. He watched the door. At dawn, the rain stopped. The world was silent, draped in a heavy, white mist. And then, the sound Silas had been expecting finally arrived. The rhythmic thud of hooves. Multiple horses, moving slow. Silas didn't wake Clara. He reached for his Winchester. He stepped out onto the porch, the wet with groaning under his boots. 3 riders emerged from the mist. They were dressed in black, their horses fine-blooded and well-fed. These weren't common outlaws. These were regulators. Men hired by the big cattle syndicates to clean up the landscape. The man in the center was older, with a silver beard and eyes like 2 pieces of flint. He wore a judge's coat and carried a heavy cane. "Morning, Thorne," the man said. Silas rested the rifle across his arm. "Judge Vance, you're a long way from the courthouse. This isn't your jurisdiction." Vance smirked. "My jurisdiction is anywhere my money reaches. Silas, you're harboring a piece of stolen property. A girl named Clara. She took something that belongs to the association." "She's a person, Vance, not a ledger book," Silas said. "She's a witness," Vance corrected, his voice turning sharp. "And she carries the evidence of a very unfortunate conversation on her finger. I want the ring, Silas, and I want the girl. You can step aside and go back to your lonely little life, or you can find out how fast we can burn this shack to the ground." Silas didn't blink. "I found the powder in the ring, Vance. Arsenic. Not enough to kill a man if he eats it, but enough to make him look like he died of a heart ailment if it slipped into his whiskey over a month. Who are you planning to kill? The governor?" Vance's smile vanished. He nodded to the men at his side. Their hands drifted toward their holsters. "You always were too smart for your own good, Thorne," Vance said. "That's why you ended up out here in the dirt, while men like me built the world. Give us the girl." "No," Silas said. The word was small, but it carried the weight of a mountain. "She asked me to hold her hand because she couldn't stop shaking," Silas said, his voice low and dangerous. I haven't felt a human heartbeat in a long time, Vance. It reminded me that I'm still alive. And if I'm alive, that means I still have one more fight in me. The man on Vance's left drew first. He was fast, but he was a city man. He relied on his nerves. Silas relied on 20 years of muscle memory. The Winchester barked twice. The first rider tumbled backward, his boot catching in the stirrup as his horse bolted. The second rider managed to fire a shot that splintered the porch railing next to Silas's ear, but Silas didn't flinch. He leveled the rifle and took a breath. The second rider went down with a heavy thud into the Montana mud. Silence returned to the ranch, broken only by the steam rising from a horse's nostrils. Judge Vance sat frozen on his mount. He wasn't a gunman. He was a man who paid for guns. "You're alone now, Judge," Silas said, stepping off the porch. "You'll hang for this," Vance hissed, his face pale. "I have friends in Helena. I have friends in Washington." "The dead don't have friends, Vance. They just have graves," Silas said. The cabin door creaked open. Clara stepped out. She looked at the bodies in the mud, then at the judge. She walked towards Silas, her feet bare on the wet wood. She held out her hand, the one with the ring. "He made me do it," she said, looking at Vance. "He told me he'd kill my brother if I didn't stay in the governor's house, if I didn't use the ring. I couldn't do it. That's why I ran." Silas looked at her. He took the ring from her finger. He didn't look at the stone. He looked at the woman. "Go inside, Clara," Silas said. "What are you going to do with him?" she asked. Silas looked at Judge Vance. He saw a man who had built a kingdom on the broken backs of people like Clara. He saw the poison that really ran the West, not arsenic, but greed. Silas didn't shoot him. He walked to Vance's horse, grabbed the bridle, and led him toward the gate. "You're going to ride back to town, Vance," Silas said. "And you're going to tell everyone that your men were killed by a band of drifters. You're going to leave this girl's name out of your mouth. Because if I ever see a black coat on my ridge again, I won't use the rifle. I'll come to your house in the middle of the night, and I'll bring the ring with me." Silas tossed the silver ring into the mud. "Now get out of here before I change my mind." Vance didn't wait. He spurred his horse and disappeared into mist, leaving his two dead men behind. Silas stood at the gate for a long time, watching the spot where the judge had vanished. He felt the cold air in his lungs. He felt the ache in his back. He felt old, but he also felt something else. A flicker of something human buried deep under the scar tissue of his life. He walked back to the cabin. Clara was standing in the kitchen, making more coffee. She didn't look like a ghost anymore. She looked like someone who had decided to stay. They didn't talk about love. They didn't talk about the future. Out here, those were expensive words that usually turn out to be lies. Instead, Silas picked up a hammer and a handful of nails. "The railing needs mending," he said. Clara nodded. "And the stove needs wood." "I'll get the axe," Silas said. That was how it began. Not with a wedding, but with work. Two broken people, a cabin at the end of the world, and a silence that didn't feel quite so lonely anymore. But here's the thing about the West. The dirt has a long memory. The bodies Silas buried that morning wouldn't stay buried forever. And men like Judge Vance don't forget humiliation. Silas Thorne knew that. He knew the storm wasn't over. It was just catching its breath. But as he sat on the porch that evening, watching the stars come out over the bighorns, he realized he wasn't shaking anymore. He looked at his hand, the one that had held Clara's in. The dark. And he realized that for the first time in 12 years, he was ready for whatever was coming next. Because sometimes the only way to kill the poison is to find someone worth protecting. So I'll ask you this. Who are you in this story? Are you the one running away from a life you didn't choose? Or are you the one standing on the porch, waiting for the rain to stop, so you can start mending what's broken? If this story meant something to you, give it a like. Share it with someone who needs to know that even the deepest scars can heal. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because the West is a big place, and we've got a lot more stories to tell. Take a deep breath. pour yourself a fresh cup and stay tuned, because out here, the end of one trail is usually just the start of another,